And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network. Well, at the Worldwide Coalition Network Radio.com website, Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Mighty Twitter at Coalition_Radio, and of course the mothership Coalition Radio S, where so much of our data from 7 years now of broadcasting live, originally on internet radio, moving on to small AM radio, moving on to big AM radio, moving on to digital TV, and now for the first time over the last week or so, in our own studio in the bunker in La Prove, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of, well, a few 100,000 stories. We're going to talk about La Providence tonight a little bit, but joining me for the first time in our new sort of late night effort is Jessie Sage. Let me tell you a little bit about her. But first, tonight's effort, we're calling it the Coalition Radio After Dark. And we're going to be handling over the next, 3 or 4 nights a week as we resolve the schedule here in the midst of the corona COVID crisis, the schedule. But at night, we're going to be talking about subjects that are a little bit more sensitive. Now, when I define that, I don't mean prurient. We're not here to do that. We're not here to titillate, per se. We're here to have conversation about issues that I've always referred to on the show as third rail issues. The type of data, the type of material that people might be a little sensitive about talking about. Sometimes they don't want to talk about it at all. We're going to talk about government. We're going to talk about sexuality. We're going to talk about the war on drugs. We're going to talk about politics, redistribution, libertarians versus progressives, but at a more adult level. That's appropriate, really, for a little bit more of a mature conversation. The point, too, also is to reach a greater part of the country. We broadcast here on the East Coast, and we're hoping that folks on the West Coast will have an opportunity to pick this up after dinner, relaxing, with their loved ones. At this point, we're at, day 13 or day 14. But let's get right down to it. We're running a little bit late because of technical issues on our end. It is my great pleasure to reintroduce to the Coalition audience. She joined us back in 1819, is Jessie Sage. Now, she is I called her in our publication for the show a Renaissance woman. She is a producer, a writer, and when I mean a writer, I mean a writer's writer, someone who has the talent. It's a little bit rare these days. There's lots of folks putting pen to paper. There's lots of folks doing Control-C and cutting, pasting. There's very little writing actually being done. She is a producer, as I said. She is also an entertainer. She is a film actress. She has appeared on Vice. She has appeared on her own productions. She has been interviewed by major publications across the country. She also does a podcast, which we'll talk about tonight. And she is also, on top of everything else, and coming full circle here, routinely presents in the academic world references to, the sex workers movement, the politics of the sex workers movement, but also her experiences as a rather extraordinary but ordinary person per se, through her weekly publication, about her experiences in the adult entertainment industry. So what you've got is a rather uncommon 360 perspective of a very complex world. A world that folks, despite it being a multi-billion-dollar presence here in the United States, folks still have trouble getting their arms around and discussing. So we're hoping she'll join us on a number of occasions going forward to really drill down on any one of the issues revolving around sexuality, the world of adult entertainment, and just people's relationships at large. Jessie, welcome back to the Coalition. It's great to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
It's the last time you were on, we were focusing more on the politics of sex work, and that we've done a lot of conversation about that tonight. If you don't mind, I'd like to really steer away from that and really get into the industry, the relationships, its impact on individual relationships, and as I mentioned, you have a rather unique perspective on all of this, from the inside out, the outside in, looking in. I hope, first of all, I just want to say, I hope you're holding up well during this whole crisis. I'm assuming you're out in the Midwest. You are quarantined like the rest of us?
I am quarantined like the rest of you, with my whole family, all in the house.
Right. And by the way, you've even written about that, the notion that folks can have an adult relationship when surrounded by multiple generations, and at the same time be involved in the adult business. So let's start and just give folks an overview of all of your different efforts. You host a podcast; it's very successful. Tell us a little bit about it and where folks can find it.
Yeah, so I host a podcast with my partner. It's called the Peep Show Podcast. We started it in the end of 2017, and we bring news and stories from the sex industry mostly. So we've done, at the beginning, our scope was a little bit bigger, and we talked about issues of sexuality in general. But now, over the last couple of years, we've kind of focused in on the sex industry at large. So all of the work that falls under the sex work umbrella. And we've brought in people who are working as activists, people who are working as performers, people who are working in various aspects of the sex industry. So that's our podcast. And out of the podcast, I started a column that's like connected to the podcast.
And tell us about that, because it's in that column that you focus a lot on everyday life, if you will.
Yeah, I do focus a lot on everyday life. So I write a column for the Pittsburgh City paper, which is the alt weekly here, and I've been writing it for a year and a half. I write weekly about issues of sexuality. So that's a little bit broader because it's for an alt weekly. So I take questions from the readers sometimes. So I'll sometimes do sort of advice about sex and relationships. I also talk about things that happen in the sex industry. I talk about my own experiences. I talk some about sex work politics. I talk some about polyamory. I talk some about family, all sorts of things that are related to sex and sexuality.
Now, on top of that, you're actually a performer as well as a producer. So first of all, I want to congratulate you and your partner on, you folks are the epitome, if you will, of what I call, you've got full control of your business model. You've got full control of the narrative that you project. You've got full control of the conversation that you have. It's very much a different world, say, than even as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, because of your individual talents and the I will say the overlap, the combination that the two of you have, you're able literally to have created in and of itself a small industry coming out of that one house right now that's just quarantined with all sorts of people living in it. So congratulations on that. There is to employ I think an overused cliche, but it's particularly it's real here. There's a real sense of empowerment here within your address, within what you folks are doing. Speak to that a little bit, because I think that's a really positive model for folks who are contemplating work in the sex industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially when I first started, I was really interested in what I could contribute, what we could contribute as a couple. And I think that from the very beginning, I do solo work too, and I've also worked with other models. But in the work that we do together, I think that we've worked hard to show our own like sex lives and what that looks like to us. And I wanted to like cultivate something that seemed like very organic and authentic to me. And I mean, that's not for everybody. But what it has done is it's allowed us to bring in people who are interested in seeing, a real couple who are married and who work together, and how we interact sexually. And that's been really an interesting experience too, because he in the middle of this has also gotten cancer, so that's impacted our work that we do together too, but it's also become kind of part of this story that we do.
A story so interesting and compelling that you folks were recently the subject of a Vice, if you will, documentary, weren't you?
Yeah, we were. That was kind of a wild experience, actually. I didn't know that I thought that anything like that would happen. Yeah, Vice came down to our house and stayed, followed us for a couple of days and interviewed us and talked to us about the work that we've done, the porn work that we've done specifically together, and how that has become part of both our politics, but also our income stream and how we sustain ourselves. And Yeah, and it also pulled from a lot of the camming that we did together. So we
Hmm.
started together doing camming and branched out into phones. I do phone sex, so I branched out into that, and we do much more like clip production now than camming, but kind of followed our career from camming into the work that we do now.
And it's fascinating because there's also a story to be told, and we'll tell it over time, I hope, of the interrelationship between technology and what's that's done as a disruptive force to transform entire industries. Now, let's think about this for just
Hmm.
a second. You're talking to someone in Rhode Island who has been able to build
Hmm.
a professional style studio, if you will. Quite frankly, Joel, who you spoke to tonight, as our producer, has done a phenomenal job. I would argue that our production qualities right now are better than what any of the AM stations have tried to duct tape together in an attempt to retain their listenership. Too bad, we're coming for you.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I'm talking to yourself and folks. Listen, if you, I don't know if you did you have a chance to watch the series The Deuce on
Hmm.
HBO. That's a generation of New York City that I grew up in, by the way, and their production values were remarkably online with what the New York City that I remember was. It was an astonishing show. But you've gone
Hmm.
from a model where organized crime slash pimp slash this slash that, every character in the world was controlling adult media to a point where in the year 2020, the guy running the independent studio who's trying to compete with radio stations is speaking to someone who's essentially been able to create a business that circumvents almost entirely that large distribution model. You're able to produce
Right.
your own high level film, your own high level digital content, and you're able to compete in the marketplace with firms that a few years ago were exponentially larger than the Jesse Sage household. It's been a remarkable change.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing about that is that it's allowed space for people who wouldn't have gained entry into the industry when there were gatekeepers. And
Right.
so, I mean, I would count myself one of those. You know, both of us aren't conventional porn star sort of people, but I think that one of the things that the decentralization of porn did was allow for a lot of different types of people to enter in and build their own audiences and built up their own fan bases. And I think what people learned when that happened is that people have a really diverse set of desires that expand so much further than what the porn industry, the conventional like porn industry, thought that people wanted.
Now, give folks a little bit of a breakdown because some folks may be familiar with with camming and not, and webcam
Hmm.
services and phone sex services. For I'll just say this: for a lot of people, that's a foreign language. For some people, pretend
Hmm.
it's a foreign language and it's not, because it is an incredibly pervasive business.
Hmm. Hmm.
And then there's folks who are listening to this, who will listen to this, who take part in it all the time. Give us a little overview of the industry and how it works.
Yeah, so I mean, it's changed over time. So the what most people were doing or what cam sites kind of came onto the scene, and what those were actually very much like this, very like live performances where people would go on to platforms like Chatterbait or Cam4 or My Free Cam. So those were internet platforms where people could stream from their bedroom, like whatever, or their studio or whatever they had, either by themselves or with partners or however they wanted to do their shows. And it's on a chat room based model. So people would go in and they would tip for the sort of things that they wanted to see or to interact with the models who were on there. So that's taken hold of the industry. It's very interesting if you go to conventions like AVN, like the Adult Video Network now, where that used to be mostly conventional, like studio style porn stars. The convention floor now is taken over by cam sites, where the porn models are more periphery, and the entire like convention floor is mostly taken up by cam models. And out of that, as cam models were becoming more professionalized, they started also creating individual clips that people could buy. So obviously cam models want to create passive income as well. So they started to produce their own content and sell those on clip sites like MiniVids. And actually a lot of the cam sites have capacities to be able to for cam models to be able to upload and sell their content on there as well. So that's kind of the cam and the clip landscape. Phone sex has been around for a long time, and that, a lot of people's surprise, still operates and still is pretty big business. I was actually just featured in Hustler, I think last month, or yeah, maybe last month. They did a spread on phone sex and how the business of phone sex is still alive and kicking. And that is exactly what you think. I mean, people call in and talk to phone sex operators, but it doesn't where they're all centers. Now we all kind of work as independent contractors. We place our own ads. We drive our own traffic through Twitter and other sorts of social media platforms and run business that way. I mean, obviously, all of these platforms take cuts of our business, so we're not entirely independent, but but you know, that's how it goes.
Well, I mean, it's really a reflection of the gig economy. It's just a different side of the gig economy than, say, driving Uber or Lyft. You're creating your own content. Folks are providing a platform. I would imagine as technology increases, you're going to ultimately look to create your own platform. Maybe not you, maybe or maybe not you guys personally, but
Yeah.
Ultimately that's the direction it's going in.
Yeah.
Do you see folks doing that yet, or are we just really on the cusp?
No, I mean, there are people who are doing that, who have their own websites. The problem is that it's difficult with payment processors. So payment processing in adult industry is always complicated, and it's particularly complicated if you're not like a big platform. The other thing that I didn't talk about that's emerging now, particularly during, or it's been emerging, but it's becoming even more popular during COVID, is the sort of social media subscription platforms like OnlyFans. So those work on a subscription-based model that kind of looks like Patreon, but a lot of people are using those too to kind of monetize their followings and their social media presences.
Do you see the type of pressure being put on the big distributors right now, the big webcam sites? Because of that, do they see that as competition? Is there pressure on them to give you, let's just say, for lack of a better term, a better share of the income that they're drawing?
I don't know about that. What I do know is that a lot of those sites are trying to replicate that. So MiniVids, for example, which is a big clip platform, now has like a subscription-based model on there as well. So the people who buy your clips there can also buy into your like monthly, thing, and you can upkeep content like that. So one of the things that's happening is that a lot of these sites are trying to, if they see that something is working on another platform, recreate that on their platforms. And most models know that they can't draw all of their income, or it's not very stable business model to draw all of their income off of one platform. So most people are working on several of these platforms.
Kind of like the Lyft driver and the guy who's switching between for traffic.
Yeah, when you see, yeah.
Let's get to your column then. Enough industry talk to be well, but I appreciate you sort of setting the stage. With any luck, I think folks around the country who end up listening to this are going to be trying out different services tomorrow.
I hope so.
Eagerly surfing the web.
I hope they go to my stuff.
Well, we will provide links, absolutely. But here's an important point. I mean, the impact of anytime you have some major exogenous event, well, in this case, COVID, years ago it would have been 9/11. it radically changes people's behaviors, their social patterns.
Mm-hmm.
I have to believe the impact of this is going to be astonishing, particularly if it continues at any length. How is, in the traditional sex business per se, where there is a direct physical interaction, that's been
Mm-hmm.
obliterated. Obviously, I mean, just
Right. Mm-hmm.
leveled, and you've got a lot of folks
Mm-hmm.
who are in very difficult financial circumstances out of that. So I don't make
Right.
light of that at all. I mean, it's for a lot of folks who didn't, for lack of a better term, didn't either have the perspective or the wherewithal or the skills to diversify. They found themselves reliant on a sort of direct physical contact. And oh my God, and there are a lot of those folks were marginalized as well, just to even begin with. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what have you seen, if you will, in changes in folks' approach to sexuality, because your background, your educational background, your work background is so diverse that you literally, your fingers on the pulse of what's happening. You're seeing firsthand how people are reacting to this. Have you seen an increase in business? Do you see folks approaching it differently? Kind of give us a snapshot if you can.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience, and what reflects like the sort of customers that I tend to attract, I think. So for me, because I'm in my 40s and because a lot of my clients are my age or older, many of whom are married with families, my phone sex business and some of the like more direct interactions like that, that's a little bit lower, and that makes a lot of sense because people are, with their families all day long. They don't have a lot of privacy. They don't, they can't interact in the same sort of way that they could. However, there's other ways in which like the way that they can contribute has gone up. So, subscriptions to my OnlyFans, for example, has gone up, and text chatting has gone up because texting is something that you can do, fairly easily. So some sorts of services that I provide have gone down and some have gone up, and I think that kind of reflects the change in lifestyle. I think, and I've talked to a lot of other people too. Some people have had an increase in their, sales because they have a lot of single people who are at home by themselves now and quarantined on their own. And so that's been a good source of business for them. The What I can say though is that in terms of business, like there's also a lot of people out of work, and on top of that, there's a lot of people who are coming into online sex work now, both because, like you mentioned before, the in-person work that they were doing like isn't viable anymore, but also people who are outside of the industry who have lost their jobs outside of the sex industry who are now trying to figure out how to make money. And that means that, the market is like oversaturated or more saturated than it used to be. Um, and that the customer habits have changed a little bit. So I think that we're experiencing like a shift that I'm not quite sure, we're just at the beginning of it, so I'm not sure how this is going to all shake out. It's interesting to see. But to your other question, I think that and I wrote about this a little bit, fantasies themselves, like the way in which people are interacting with their sexuality, are changing as well. And I think that's pretty interesting.
Give us an example. I mean, again, you're speaking to people. It's a very, I would imagine, not sure, but I would imagine it's a relatively intimate experience. You're actually having a conversation
Mm-hmm.
with these folks. Is it an issue of tensions and fears that they're feeling that are motivating their approach to sexuality? Is it actually the content of their sexuality or the direction that's
Mm-hmm.
taking place? What have you seen?
Yeah, I've seen both of those things. I've seen a lot of people who are very like anxious and depressed. And so those clients who wanted things that were much more like directly sexual have stepped back from that because maybe they've lost their sex drive, but still want the sort of like companionship. So I've seen some of that, a shift away from kind of for some clients away from overt, sexy talk to more processing what they're going through or what they're feeling or what their fears are. But I've also seen something else that's happened, which is that like people are using fantasies, their erotic imagination or fantasies to kind of work through what they're experiencing with their fears about the virus. So I actually interviewed, for example, I interviewed a couple of phone sex operators for my most recent column, and they were talking about the fact that, one of their customers wanted to play out a role play of both of them being in hazmat suits. Another one, yeah, and another one, and they couldn't touch each other. I mean, it was very much about social distancing and PPE stuff. So that's interesting on its own. Another one said that one of her customers wanted to change the setting of his office fantasies to his home office, but wanted to be very specific about the fact that he's now working from home. So even the settings of the sort of interactions have changed. And I think that brings up a lot of interesting questions. I think it'll be interesting to see, if people have fantasies about going to the grocery store now, or eroticize doing the very small things that we can do that we didn't used to pay much attention to before. Like, how is that going to shape these interactions? I'm not sure yet.
It's interesting because, as I mentioned, exogenous events happen, these great crises occur, and they redirect trends that were just steamrolling industries, cultures, things like that. A lot of folks have been writing recently in the last year or so about how extreme pornography had gotten, how extreme sexuality had gotten, and how a lot of folks were keying on the more extreme elements, whether it be bondage, near violent situations, things like that. Do you see this? Had you seen that trend taking place, people becoming more extreme as a result, perhaps, of spending more time with adult entertainment material? Or what's your thought on that? And has it been blunted at all now all of a sudden by this shift in folks' personal focus?
I don't know that I can speak to that, only because I don't do very extreme stuff. So I think that the people who are looking for that go someplace else. So so that's hard for me to speak to. I think that people are because a lot of people are very like touch deprived right now, that there's ways I think that the extremeness might scale back to much more simple things like fetishizing, contact and touch in ways that were kind of taken for granted before. So, I'm not sure. I think that go ahead.
I was saying, could romance reintroduce itself into adult entertainment?
I think that's possible.
Yeah, again, as someone I try to observe, and again, I just seen, and particularly as I get older, I've just seen these violent swings, if you will, in the culture, back and forth, and almost like a pinball effect. And I just, because the question that's got to be on a lot of folks' mind right now, particularly as folks are, you've got major adult entertainment sites declaring themselves free for the next, 30 or 60 or 90 days or however this long lasts, which is clearly a huge impact on their business model. But the notion of what adult entertainment does to intimacy within relationships and intimacy within the relationship of people who are actually involved in working in it, to me, are fascinating because there is so much back and forth. You're in one level, you're providing potential intimacy to people who have none, who literally have none in their life whatsoever. And at the same time, are you influencing people's relationships? I don't know if it's positively or negatively on what they're looking for with an outside party, and the fact that they're looking for with an outside party. I mean, you've seen so much of this firsthand. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in my own interactions with clients, there's been a lot. I've had a lot of experiences of people who really really want to introduce things to their partners or to their spouses that they don't know how to introduce, and they want to play out all of the ways in which they could do that. You know, they want to almost practice. There's a way that a lot of people are practicing their uh, how they would talk about, how they would understand, how they would explain their own desires. And I mean, I'm obviously coming from the perspective of somebody who does a lot of phone sex, which is very like um, uh, heady in a way. You know, you don't call a phone sex operator for the same reason that you watch a porn clip. I mean, you do want to like process and talk about your desires. So yeah, I mean, I
Well,
think that.
well, that's
Go
interesting though. I
ahead.
mean, if you could develop on that, because for
Hmm.
most casual observers, you would see both as quote unquote pornography, for lack of a better term. All right.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it is pornography. I mean, I wouldn't pull away from that. I think that there is an element of it that's that, but I think that it's a different medium.
hmm So folks are looking to for different reasons and expecting different results from each medium separately. There's this,
Hmm.
and how would you classify that? Is the phone sex component going to develop a greater deal of intimacy for them in their lives? It's complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can do that with a lot of things. I know there's a clip that my husband and I made together one time that was something that somebody ordered, and he was trying to understand his own like bisexuality, and so he asked us to invite him into like a threesome. I mean, I guess this is the after hour thing, so I might as well say.
Yeah.
And when we made when we made that for him, he told us that he'd never cried while watching porn because he actually felt like his desires were accepted. And that was one of the first times that he had felt that. So I think that you can achieve that with porn as well, because I've seen that happen. Like I've seen people feel very seen um, when they've watched something that like deeply resonated with them and with their desires. So there's that. But yeah, I think that the one-on-one sort of interaction that you can get with one-on-one camming or with phone sex is can be like really intimate, and it can also be very exploratory where people are reaching out because they have a like they want to think through and work through their feelings and their desires and their conflicts that they have about their own sexuality, and we get a lot of that. And it can be really difficult because it's kind of emotional. It's a lot of emotional labor, but it can also be uh, really powerful. And I do think that this work can and does impact people's personal lives as well.
How willing are people to open up quickly to you in a situation like that? I'm intrigued. Do folks come
More
on the
than
phone and,
Faster than you would
and
expect.
okay?
Yeah, faster than you would expect. um Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, there are sometimes that, there's relationships that I've had for years where over time they develop and you learn more, just like in any type of relationship at all. And then there's people who call once and who will just say, "Hey, I've been thinking about this thing and I wanted to confess, or I wanted to um do it as a role play, or I wanted to try it out in, a safe space before I bring it up to, you know, my partner and get, there's a lot of different ways in which people interact with, people who do online sex work.
Do you find yourself having to literally draw it out of them? Has that become a peripheral skill that you have to master?
Yeah, my partner says that it sounds to him like I'm conducting a job interview when I do phone sex, which sounds like so super unsexy. But he laughs because he thinks that I ask a bajillion questions, which I think that I think is how I do that at the beginning, as I start to ask people like what they're thinking about, why they're thinking about that, if they've had those sorts of experiences or if it's just a fantasy, and I go through and find out where they're coming from and how deep these things are and where they want to go with them. And I don't I think it depends on the person, but people I think are really open to wanting to explore those things, and especially in a medium where it's semi-anonymous.
If you're just joining us, we have on the line with us. You are now officially, by the way, a repeat offender here at the Coalition. Jessie Sage has joined us. I refer to her in our run up to the show as a Renaissance woman. She's been an academic, a performer, an activist, a writer, a producer. You encompass a lot of roles, and there's a lot of talents in her and her partner. We've already provided links. We'll do it again to their podcast, as well as to columns that she's written for a Pittsburgh-based arts alternative newspaper, the kind that we love to celebrate here in Rhode Island, by the way. We used to have a couple, and the economies of that have been very, very challenging as well. This is certainly, the flip side of this is that you're a woman living in a regular community. You have regular interaction with, for lack of a better term, I guess one term would be vanilla folk.
Yeah.
You find yourself also in situations that are not uncommon, but perhaps a little exaggerated because you're doing this work and you've got family and responsibilities and all the other things that come with a quote unquote, what at least up till 2 weeks ago was a normal American life. Now
Yeah.
you're very, you have a very, what's a little bit unusual per se is that you have a very front forward facing career. You actively write in the community that you live in. So how have people reacted to you in the sense that, people are going to, I'm curious because in one sense, are people, particularly other women, challenged by your, your complete acceptance of your sexuality? Are people threatened by that? Are people shocked by it? What, I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It's a weird thing because people recognize me. I'm fairly recognizable, which means that, oftentimes when I go out, they'll, stop me and talk to me and say that they read my column, which means that they know a lot about my sex life, all of these strangers. And that's really strange. But I haven't gotten a ton of negative pushback. I get some weirdness at events sometimes by people who, particularly I think by people who know me from like our porn, where they'll stop and they'll say, "Oh, I recognize you," and be a little bit awkward about that. But yeah, I think for the most part, you know, I'm very, very out. I have another job that's a vanilla job and people know what I do. It's I'm very open and forthcoming about the choices that we've made and the life that we make or the life that we have. And so I think it would be which is a privilege, and I recognize that. But I think it'd be hard for people to give me much of a hard time because it's something that I've fully embraced.
Right. There's no shame quotient that they can play on. There's no guilt quotient they can play on. This is
Right.
represents who you are. And there are
Right.
folks who, given the opportunity, would play off of that, but there's a certain
I'm
matter of
fairly
factness about it.
unblackmailable. Yeah, I'm fairly like there's recently somebody said was joking about the fact that I know how to use like a webcam, and he's like, "Oh, I won't tell anybody how you know that." And I was like, "Tell anyone you want. Like everybody already knows that."
Right.
That's no secret. So I
Right.
I had to make a very conscious decision, and when I took my column about what that was going to do to me, and I think it did close a lot of doors, and it did probably burn some bridges, but that kind of just expedites the process of weeding out like who lines up with you and agrees with your values and who doesn't. And so, it was a hard process at the beginning, and I think at this point it's so integrate. My work is so integrated into my life that you know it is what it is.
Well, and you actually, in terms of the Pittsburgh alternative writing scene, your column took the place of arguably the most influential general media sex columnist in forever. I mean, that's how he essentially rewrote the book on how people talk about sex in media. He had a profound impact on how people talk about alternative lifestyles, the LGBTQA community, actual graphic conversations about sexual practices. To a certain degree, in his own way, he single-handedly normalized what a lot of folks have been thinking. What a lot of folks have been thinking about for a very long time. So you essentially slipped into that role and have added your own chapter to it. And so as a result, what I'm also interested in is how many folks will approach you and just out of genuine curiosity start to talk to you like they're your therapist or something. I mean, does that happen as well?
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that's been weird. And can you imagine how surprised I was when they asked me to take that place, given that I grew up on Dan Savage?
Right.
Yeah, that's actually really, it's kind of an odd experience. It's an odd experience to have people who know a lot about me that I don't know, but I think that comes with having a public facing career. It just comes with having a public facing career.
No, absolutely. What, clearly with the current situation at large, everything is up in the air. It's difficult for a lot of us to try and make plans. Where would you, let's take, we've got high hopes here, high apple pie in the sky hopes, right? Let's assume in 30, 60, 90 days, life essentially begins to return to normal. And there's the odd part about this, if you're a fan of, I used to be a fan of the sort of post-apocalyptic science fiction. Now that I'm starting to live a little bit, I don't know, I don't really have the taste for it I used to, but
life gets a little scarier.
Yeah, no, this is yikes. In one sense, at least the face of the country is going to be very, very similar. Mm-hmm. We're going to walk down the same streets. We're going to see the same buildings. Many more of them, sadly, might be empty than what we thought, and that's just because of the toll this is taking on business. Mm-hmm. So against that backdrop, yes, it's difficult to project, but what direction would you like to take this into? What challenges are you looking for? How do you see yourself as almost a missionary, if you will, on behalf of sexuality, trying to explain it to people? Has it taken on that role, or do you want to draw back and just focus on the art?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I can say that. I mean, that would be amazing, but I don't know. I would like to continue to write my column. It's really meaningful to me. I feel like representational work, particularly in the sex industry, is really important. I feel like telling stories, which is what I do in both my podcast and in the column, like telling people's stories, can be really culture changing in the sense that you personalize and put a face on really marginalized and stigmatized identities, and people change their minds. And so I see the role that I play in the storytelling that we do, both with the podcast and with my column, to be really important work to me, really important in terms of destigmatizing sex work and also other people within like marginalized sexual communities. So I feel very strongly about that work that I'm doing, and I want to continue to do it. Where it's going to go, I don't know. But yes, I mean, I also would like to continue to do the videos and the client facing like sex work that I do, because I find that to be really meaningful and important as well. I think that as you said before, a lot of people a lot of people don't feel seen and are lonely in their lives, or they have sexual desires that they can't fulfill within their lives for any particular reason. And I think that our sex lives are important to us, and I often feel like a privilege working with people that I work with. So I would like to continue to do that as well. But what's going to be available after all this is over, I can't predict.
Yeah, I don't think any of us, at the very least, what folks in your business do, and particularly your approach to it, is that there are people out there who are islands or consider themselves islands, and the confirmation is that someone will accept them. The fact that they may not be as alone or as individualistic as they think they are. They may not. I'm damaged goods because I enjoy this goes away a lot when you simply find other people who are interested. Polyamory is one of them. That's it's nationally. I'm a libertarian, and there's an entire group of folks in the libertarian movement who would advocate for polyamory, and so and that is clearly a practice and an approach to a lifestyle that is starting to emerge and starting to evolve, and much less so than it's a new creation. It's more just an admission by a lot of folks that they're involved in it.
Right.
And so the folks' approach to sexuality, this approach to sexuality may simply be liberating folks to, I don't know, enjoy the life that they've chosen to lead. That's pretty good. That's pretty good stuff. You know, I don't do that as a talk show host. I don't accomplish things like that for people. I simply babble on incessantly in the hopes that somebody, my God, is listening to me. So I like I said, I admire what you do a lot. I think it's the fact that you've been able to create take this whirlwind of different activities and make them meaningful is tremendous. I'm hoping you'll join now with this new setup we've got. You'll join us from time to time as things evolve, things change, and you've got new ideas, new perspectives. In a sense, with civil rights and the political side of what you do, I think everything is kind of on hold right now because we're not sure until this is done what civil rights or rights we're going to have left. That's an entirely different conversation. Unfortunately out there appears to be the never in the government in particular, never let a good crisis go to waste element. And I think folks like us from our different perspectives have to continue to stake our claim to our independence for our lifestyles, our beliefs, and our self-ownership. And you folks do a remarkable job of that. So I'm incredibly grateful for you joining us tonight in the midst of all this chaos. And, if you had one thing to say to folks who are out there and they're contemplating, there's guilt associated with adult entertainment, there's potential guilt associated or confusion with phone sex or any of these other things, what would you say to them to say that, this is okay? How would you reach out to them if you had that chance?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I would just tell them that like sex workers are the most empathetic and compassionate and open-minded people that I've come across, and that reaching out to that, and that they take all forms and are from all walks of life. So finding someone to reach out to, I think can be a really positive experience for them.
Excellent. Where can folks find Jessie Sage on the web? We provided a few links, but give us a summary, and I know that you've got this. What do you call this? An Insta bio page.
There's so many places. I don't have Facebook actually. That's the one thing I don't have. There's so many places. You can find me on Twitter. That's probably the most active at sapiotextual. You can find me. I have an OnlyFans page, onlyfans.com/sapiotextual. You can find me on Instagram at Curvaceous Sage. You can find my writing, all of my writing and my press interviews and everything like that at jessiesage.com. Let's see what else. You can find the podcast at peepshowpodcast.com. You can find my column at pghcitypaper.com. It's pretty easy. You can just Google search Jesse Sage.
Excellent. And I would recommend people go to the site and read the columns, because it's a mixture of they're provocative for obvious reasons, but at the same time there's humor there. There's and I'll say it's a gentle humor, because in reading your columns, you're never the type to poke fun at people or any of that. It's kind of an empathy mixed with a kind of a smile as you look upon the human condition. How is that fair? So the website's
I'm
really
nice.
good read.
I won't make fun of anyone.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I hope you had fun, and let's talk in the very, very near future. Jesse Sage on the Coalition. We draw this segment to a close. We're going to restart the computers because everything's kind of a mess tonight. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network here at the WorldwideCoalitionRadioNetwork.com, Facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course CoalitionRadio.us, where links exist to our YouTube page, our Twitter page, or this page, or that. We're on Spotify. We're everywhere. We are also embarking on something new now, and that is, of course, we are morphing as well into a talk radio station. So if I remember the number correctly, 401-205-3738. We're going to throw that up in a couple of minutes. We're going to be up for a while here just to take your calls and to kind of gauge people's reaction, and you can find the links to that once we restart CoalitionRadioNetwork.com. The point being, there is late night and television conversation being brought to you now. It doesn't have to be all sports. It doesn't have to be all ranting and ravings about whichever side of the aisle you happen to believe in. If you notice, we went an entire hour without mentioning Donald Trump. So there you go. Listen, thanks for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you soon. We'll be back on tomorrow night at 9 o'clock, and then we'll have talk radio into the wee hours. Hope to see you soon. Thank you so much. Echo.